porque vivas se las llevaron y vivas las queremos. Las queremos de vuelta en casa como siempre.
They didn't want us to speak. They didn't want us to unite. But it's too late now. Ha! Hip-hop has united us. Make one instrumental.
Porque vivas se las llevaron y vivas las queremos. Las queremos de vuelta en casa como siempre.
They didn't want us to speak. They didn't want us to unite. But it's too late now. Ha! Hip-hop has united us. Make one instrumental.
We will rise, we will fight, we will stand strong, we will do what's right. We will rise, we will fight, we will stand strong, we will do what's right.
Somos nosotras de nuevo, trayendo rap y fuego. Nuevas hermanas se unieron a esta exigencia de respeto. Llena de conciertos de consignas, solo observo. Entes criminales salen en medios sociales. Menos bla bla bla, falta más verbo, consenso. Como en el comienzo.
Guerreras en la lucha por nuestras vidas. Solo juntas sanaremos las heridas. No more bloodshed over our sacred land. We're in this fight together, walking hand in hand. Basta de la política de la violación. Aunque intentan impedir tácticas de corrupción, seguimos adelante con el puño hacia el sol. A Tecocoli de la mano, un farol.
Vivas, viva la flama, juntas, dueñas de nosotras mismas. Activistas, artistas, no musas, rompecabezas, tantas preguntas. Muchas formas de ser creadoras. Normas obsoletas serán cenizas. Nuevas poderosas, revitalizadoras. Mujeres hip hopas, nunca más solas.
La frontera más deseada. La frontera más deseada. Somos la generación que rompe con el sueño americano. Vamos y solo de paso nuestra semilla se esparce. Abona la palabra, el agua me sana. Paren de saquearla. Paren de saquearla. Paren de saquearla. Paren de saquearla. La conciencia nos llama, que quienes nos colonizaron ya no lo hagan. Me subo a mi escoba y truenan las palabras. Y truenan las palabras.
We will rise, we will fight, we will stand strong, we will do what's right. We will rise, we will fight, we will stand strong, we will do what's right.
Somos nosotras de nuevo, trayendo rap y fuego. Nuevas hermanas se unieron a esta exigencia de respeto.
Nos quieren dividir, pero somos la Pangea. Obedecer sin cuestionar, que embrutezca y no lea, que encasille en su estándar o que me sienta fea. Juntarnos y luchar es lo que nos queda. Códigos que matan, violencia en la propia casa. Patriarcado instaurado en la calle, una amenaza. El abuso sexual con el baño no se pasa. Me cago en las fronteras que explotan nuestra raza.
Las palabras viajan a través del tiempo. Hoy ya no podemos parar este movimiento. Somos morras con mucho talento, que a través del rap mostramos nuestro descontento de este mundo tan violento, tan adverso y tan grotesco. Ya no queremos minería a cielo abierto, ni megaproyectos que te roban el aliento. Y en silencio contaminan nuestro viento. Nuestro viento contaminan en silencio. Nuestro viento contaminan en silencio. En silencio contaminan nuestro viento. evolucionando cuando el cambio es necesario. La toma de conciencia, autonomía y defensa de los pueblos en resistencia. Uniendo nuestras fuerzas en América se hace la revuelta. Con la digna rabia manifiesta. Con la digna rabia manifiesta. Sarita en la casa.
Sí. Unidas somos más fuertes, suenan las semillas al ritmo del presente. Isabel Cabanillas, viva en la memoria siempre. Fuimos todas guerreras valientes, asesinadas y desaparecidas. Hermanas nativas, honramos sus vidas. No se olvidan, aquí nadie olvida. Muerto venganza para el feminicida.
Detrás del conocimiento tenemos el sentimiento. Me curo el malestar con tecitos de jengibre siempre libres. No habrá misericordia mientras esta melodía que cae en la demencia. Lo hacemos con conciencia. Pareciera no tuviéramos decencia. No mostramos obediencia y aunque a veces la vida lastima, lamemos nuestras heridas, te compongo unas rimas. Más mujeres unidas, combativas, diosas de las periferias, siempre en resistencia.
No more snowing in a murdered relative.
Alerta compañera, que el patriarcado mata. Tener que defenderte a pulso punta de navaja. Es nuestra la ventaja, la rabia nos cobija. Nacimos pa' vencer, vamos que reprender esta fogata. Todavía sueño con aquella barricada que se hace en nuestros puños, consignas afiladas. Devuelve mi mirada, violeta, morada, posdata, hermana. Aquí está tu manada, nómada, por la tierra me encontré. Oleadas de mujeres que erizan la piel, con la fuerza de volcanes para atacar todos los males. Comunidad unida, no pensamientos coloniales. Nunca fuimos rivales, entendimos sentido y ahora vamos triunfantes. Seguimos siendo musas de otras compas que se cruzan, porque morra con morra apoyamos en la lucha. Tejimos redes grandes, ahora todos nos escuchan. Siempre siendo fuertes, ya no tenemos duda, no, ya no tenemos duda.
Ancestralmente, sangre guerrera, nuestra vía yala en resistencia. Respiro profundo hasta sentir el centro de la tierra en mi latir. Mujer Pachamama, la fuerza omega, transmutamos la rabia en lucha. Somos la frontera, somos la periferia, el amor romántico, la colonización. Bye bye.
De la hiedra anónima. Somos movimiento, fuego en el cielo. Un viento del norte se escucha allá afuera. Cantos sagrados erizan la piel, multiplican el ritual. Cabalgamos entre ríos, desierto y montañas. Junto a tu recuerdo me escabullo al sur viajando. Y sin alivio y con mi arrullo declamo para las que luchan.
We will rise, we will fight, we will stand strong, we will do what's right. We will rise, we will fight, we will stand strong, we will do what's right.
Somos nosotras de nuevo, trayendo rap y fuego. Nuevas hermanas se unieron a esta exigencia de respeto.
Paso a paso, cruzando ríos por el vaso, nunca imaginando que el destino sería el campo santo. Persecución sobre mis tierras ancestrales, la vida de mis hijas en las putas manos federales. La frecuencia de tu voz, tu ánima, mi alma, mi hermana descendiente de Chimalma. Fronterizas indígenas, México a Canadá, ni una más que se oiga hasta atrás, tras, que se queme el Alcatraz. Tierra, paz y libertad, nunca las vamos a olvidar.
Comparto el mismo cielo alrededor del mundo. Tocas a una, respondemos todas. Trascender, entender todo a mi alrededor. Distintos colores del atardecer aparecen en tanta calamidad. Con latido corazón, mi mente con razón. Alzo mis manos, expando mis sueños. Como dice la canción, one love. Unidas venceremos en manifestaciones, actos políticos, ruido en la calle. Arriba las que luchan, abajo el patriarcado. Que va a caer, va a caer. MC Areco represents, con guerreras sin fronteras, yeah.
Sobre el humo de mi copalero, sobre el humo de mi copalero, sobre el humo de mi copalero, las llamas de fuego ardiendo así como sangre. Dentro de vena los huesos, la carne me llama y con mi filero en mano doy rezos que crezca venganza. La fuerza de autodefensas florece rebelde el cuerpo, mi pueblo, la tierra primera yo mismo defiendo. Y yo no vengo sola, yo no vengo sola, no. Obedecer a quien obedecer jamás ya no. Disidente lo sé,
We will rise, we will fight, we will stand strong, we will do what's right. Our sisters are still in trouble. Their
just speak into it.
cries
It's just like a
rise
normal
up from the
microphone.
rubble.
It's just,
Vivas nos queremos.
and then this one, just a normal handheld microphone. And
We
then
are the
a
hearts
lavalier
of
microphone that
those
clips right here
that stopped beating.
for everyone. For anybody can choose anything,
What I would say
or they can pass it
is
around.
to, yeah, maybe we'll have them pass around the handheld.
Great.
I can use, because I'll be moderating the questions, so.
Yeah. And if you want, if you have questions from the audience,
Yeah,
this can be thrown around.
That's what I was thinking. This would be good
Great.
for when we do the Q&A.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Okay.
I'll lay this one right over here. Actually, somebody's gonna be talking before.
Yeah.
Great. Sounds good.
Nancy is gonna be just featured on Zoom. She
All right, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started in about another minute. So if we could have you all take your seats. And then we'll have the panelists come up as I introduce. All right, so good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yeah, we have maybe another 10, 15 minutes here left of the morning, but it's still a very beautiful morning. I'm glad you all survived the storms last night. And also if hopefully those of you traveling today will not have some travel issues. If you don't know me, my name is Mora. I'm currently serving as a deputy provost at Metropolitan State University of Denver. I'm also a professor of economics, and my research involves has involved throughout my career looking at Hispanic and Latino socioeconomic outcomes. Education is part of that, intersectionality is part of that. And so when I saw the theme of this particular panel, I wanted to make sure that I was the one to moderate it, because these are topics of interest to me and have been throughout my career. I've been in higher education for almost 30 years now. We have a wonderful panel that's lined up with distinguished scholars, leaders, and artists. And so I'm going to give just a very brief introduction of each of them, and then we'll have them come up. This is going to be a panel discussion. I've given the panelists a couple of questions that I will ask them, but I do hope that we'll be able to spend some time today listening to your questions and hearing the panelists' responses. Unfortunately, one of our panelists was unable to make it because of some travel issues, but she is joining us online. And so I will go ahead and briefly introduce her when we have her. I wonder if we can make her a little bit bigger. Dr. Nancy Lopez. She is a professor of sociology at the University of New Mexico. She directs the Institute for the Study of Race and Social Justice at UNM, which is an institute that she helped co-found. And then she has race in quotes. Her teaching, research, and service are all guided by insights of intersectionality, which is the importance of examining race, gender, class, and ethnicity together so that she can interrogate and interrogate her interests across a wide variety of social outcomes. So please join me in giving Dr. Lopez a round of applause. And then she was kind enough that if we did have technical difficulties, we appreciate, she even sent some video recorded remarks for answers to the questions, but we do think it's gonna be much better if it's interactive like this. So thank you very much for being willing to do that. Next on our agenda, we also have Dr. Paul Joseph Lopez Oro, who is a transdisciplinary Black studies scholar whose research and teaching interests are on Black, Indigenous histories, cultures, and politics on Central America, Caribbean coast, Black queer feminist theories and ethnographies, and also Black and Latinx social movements. He is an assistant professor and director of Africana studies at Bryn Mawr College. Had a busy morning this morning coming in today, so we greatly appreciate his participation as well. And so if we can have him come up, we'll have the panelists sit up front. Yep. Yeah, just briefly introduce to you. In addition, we have Dr. Eileen Jimenez, who is the Dean of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and also Dean of Justice-Involved Solutions at South Seattle College. She's an Indigenous educator, leader, community member, and artist. Everything she does and creates is influenced by her many intersecting identities and lived experiences. So thank you, Dr. Jimenez, for being here. And then last but not least, we have Saray Argumedo, who was Chichimeca. She was born in South Central Los Angeles and raised in the borderlands of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. So I know our incoming chair, Dr. Cristobal Rodriguez, is excited about that one, being from El Paso himself. She is a member of GUERRERXS Sin Fronteras and director of a short documentary, Vivas nos Queremos. I'm sorry, I was going to trip over that. Quereremos, which is We Want Us Alive. GUERRERXS Sin Fronteras. The bios are, more details about their bios are in your conference program, so we do encourage you to please go through them because the brief sentences I read about these distinguished panelists don't do justice to the fantastic work that they've done over the years. So if we can have Saray also join us up front. And then those of you who came in a little bit early, we were playing some music. And so I know that's something that Saray will also be responding to. So I'm going to go ahead. We just had the 3 seats. I'm going to start with the questions. I did ask the panelists to think about just brief remarks for the answers, because again, we want to make this more interactive. So I will go ahead and start with the first question, and I'll sit up here because it's kind of weird to be looking behind our panelists. And then we have fancy microphone that we'll be passing across the panelists. And I guess I was told we can throw them at people. So I don't know if we want to do that, but certainly it's lightweight. Okay. All right. So the 2024 AAHHE conference theme prioritizes the idea of questioning what counts and what doesn't count as knowledge in academic spaces. Please share some examples based on your own research and other areas of expertise. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the order that I had when I was given the program, and that was with Dr. Nancy Lopez was listed first.
Gracias, Doctora Mora, and saludos familia. I love this question because in thinking about what does and does not count as knowledge in academic spaces, I think about the importance of centering our community cultural wealth in this saying that I'm sure most of you have heard, no se puede tapar el sol con un dedo. You can't cover the sun with a finger, and it's useful for thinking about the research I've been doing on the evolution of race and ethnicity categories in the Office of Management and Budget, and of course in the census. And it's an important insight. Why? Because right now, I'm sure you're aware that the Office of Management and Budget is revising the federal standards that tell everyone, including the census, how to collect race and ethnicity data, and they're proposing to make them co-equal. So we know that for many decades, we've had two separate questions, one on Hispanic origin, where I can identify as a Dominican woman, and then the second question on race, where I can identify as Black, and that this data are used to examine complex inequalities. Recently, I co-authored a piece with the UCLA Latino Politics and Policy Institute that revealed complex inequalities for Afro-Latinos that would remain invisible if we go forward with this recommendation to collect two analytically distinct concepts, race, which has a visual and ocular and corporeal dimension, and cultural heritage, right, which absolutely is different. And in fact, we even had to use 2019 data because the 2020 data actually asked about race and origin in one question. And anyone who, like me, marked, oh yes, my origin is Dominican or Cuban or whatever the case may be, Mexican, and also Black, was recoded as two or more. So obviously, this is a very serious issue that will impact the distribution of resources for not only Black Latino communities, but many other communities that are subjected to anti-Blackness. And so these proposals to conflate race, the visual social status, and ethnicity, a cultural heritage, will impact not only counts, but accuracy. You know, it's very clear that there are better ways to measure race, and the census has never done that. I co-authored two publications, one in the sociology of race and ethnicity and critical public health, that uses additional measures, not just self-identity, but what I call street race. If you were out in public, what race do you think others who do not know you would assume you are based on what you look like? And we uncover, again, many inequities that remain invisible otherwise. I also co-authored a piece with the Urban Institute recently on observing race and ethnicity through a new lens that included the brown category, which reduces the number of Latinos who mark some other race. But again, even though my archival research with my colleagues Yasmin Irizarry and Edward Vargas uncover in the archives that for decades, since the 1970s, the Spanish Origin Advisory Committee to the census has asked for a National Academy study and also said, if Latinos want to mark brown, let them. They've never tested any of that. And whether or not that maps into different inequities for those Latinos who many members of our families are racialized as white, as brown, as Black, Indigenous, and so on, Asian, and so on. So I ask, who's afraid of keeping separate questions on race and ethnicity? And where do we go from here? It's very telling that the American Anthropological Association in 1997 sent a memo to the OMB specifically telling them to use the combined question as a bridge to the elimination of race data. So I'll end my comments there, simply saying that what counts as knowledge is always contested, particularly when it comes to the collection of race and ethnicity data. Gracias.
Right, thank you very much. And thank you for your work in that area and also your advocacy in terms of looking at how data are collected. So we'll go next to Dr. Lopez Oro. Same question.
Is this really a mic?
It is a microphone.
It's really a mic? Can you hear me? Oh, okay. All right. Buiti Rabuño, buenas tardes, good afternoon. I am Pablo Jose Lopez Soto. I'm an assistant professor of Africana Studies at Bryn College. I am going to respond to this question from the field of Black Studies. It's a question that really galvanizes the question about disciplines, right? And it questions about the intersectionality of knowledge production. So just a really kind of quick Black Studies 101, which is really different from Latinx studies. Latinx studies actually doesn't really emerge from this particular history. Ethnic studies does, but Latinx studies is a bit more of a complicated interdisciplinary field. Black studies really emerges from student and faculty activism, right? From not only the exclusion of African descended communities and the knowledge production that they do in the academy, but also the silencing of the archives, right? The silencing of the gaps in the archives, right? Not being able to see our communities, our forms of knowledge production through Black Indigenous expression, right? So I'm also speaking from a Garifuna Honduran perspective, from a New York City perspective, a Brooklynite perspective, a third generation Brooklynite, a first one of US citizenship in the US, right? So complicating how do we understand academic production and knowledge production in particular. So I work a lot around oral histories, right? And Vicky Ruiz really paved the way for all of us to really think about, well, what does it mean when our histories aren't documented? Where do we go, right? So I turn to the embodiment. I turned to the public performances of Garifuna Central Americans in New York City to really think about an embodied archive that transmits, right, not only ancestral memory, but also transmits knowledge generationally. So I spend a lot of time thinking through elders, thinking through what does it mean to build community with your interlocutors? What did it also mean to be an insider outsider, right? In many ways, a lot of the work that I do is both autoethnographic, but also deeply rooted in ideas of Black indigeneity within the community, right? And I want to also trouble this idea of Hispanidad, right? There's still we still have a chokehold on Hispanidad, right? The term Hispanic still has an incredibly both political and social impact in our lives. Yet race is still a really important marker, right? And it's a very important signifier when we think about not only Afro-Latinidad, but knowledge production, right? So in many ways, right, part of the knowledge production within Latinx studies is the question of race. What do we do with the conundrum of race within Latinidad? What is it about this project of Latin American mestizaje that still remains really present in the US, right? What is this project of also canceling Latinidad because of the erasure, the silences, right? Because part of what Blackness and indigeneity is doing to Latinidad, it simply can't be an add-on to this mestizo project. It can't simply be an add-on to a project where we are so racially mixed que todos somos iguales, todos somos mexicanos, todos somos bolivianos, right? This idea of the racial mixture creates this racial harmony. Well, part of the myth of racial democracy is the continued erasure of Black and Indigenous communities within that project. And you see it clearly in US racial politics of Latinidad, right? You know, what does it mean in 2024 to go back and forth between Hispanic and Latinx, right? What does it mean to have that shift? I mean, we all intellectually deeply understand, right? Cristina Mora at UC Berkeley's sociology department writes this book telling us the US government invented the term Hispanic. We deeply understand the Spanish colonial history of the US, the complicated relationship it has to the US government, but we still hold on to these terms, right, as a form of knowledge production, right? Because part of that knowledge production is there's a certain kind of project around Latinidad. There's a certain kind of project behind Hispanidad, right? And this is someone who also spent 3 years in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it was the first time I ever left Brooklyn, New York. And my Latinidad could not be registered in Albuquerque, New Mexico, right? And that is clearly to do with the Southwest, right? And the particular Spanish colonial history of the Southwest, right? And how do we register Black Latinx people, right? How do we see Black Latinx people? And then part of that conversation is the indigeneity of Latinidad, right? A lot of my work is also pushing this idea of like, well, what would it mean for us to have an understanding that Blackness is also indigenous to the Americas, right? It really troubles our understanding of who we are as a collective, but also the differences among us, right? So part of the knowledge production is to really think about what are some of the on-earth archives that we still have to do the work with, right? Because part of our archives are not in these institutions. Our archives are not in the ivory tower, right? They're in the bodegas and the pulperias, right? They're in the plazas, the mercados and the marquetas, right? So we have to think about how do we constantly bring knowledge production. And I'm constantly thinking about access, right? I'm constantly thinking in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Garifuna, right? Making things accessible to our communities and bring them into these spaces. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Jimenez. And it's the same question. So in terms of your own work, examples based on your own work and your artistry, your research, scholarship, et cetera, what counts and what doesn't count as knowledge in academic spaces?
Yeah, thank you so much. I was a finalist for a job last week and I had a forum. And so I'm having flashbacks of that with all of this. So like, I kind of wish that we were like in a circle and on the same level and stuff. And so I have notes so that I don't forget. And I'm a nervous public speaker, especially again in this kind of space. You know, my work and my research, I guess, and my art really focuses on traditional knowledge. I remember reading Vine Deloria, Power and Place, and like being mind blown and like sobbing when he talks about, or when they talk about this concept of Western education and like what the purpose of it is, right? The purpose of our PhDs, our doctorates, is to become an expert in your field, right? And I remember always being so like scared of that, like being like, I don't think I can get a doctorate because like, what am I going to contribute? You know, like I my first day at UCLA as a freshman, I remember our professor asked us, where do you see yourself in 5 years, right? And my question was, I was a math major. I thought I was going to change the world with math. And I was like, I think I'm going to be in my PhD program in math. And she was like, you know, that's really hard. You're going to have to create a new thing. You should really talk to someone about that and think about it more, right? And since then, I think I was like, well, she's right. I don't think I can create something new, right? And again, back to this concept that Vine Deloria talk about, right? About the difference between that Western knowledge and Western education and traditional knowledge, right? In traditional knowledge, the point of learning is so that you can contribute back to your community, right? And apply it back to your community. I think a lot about, I'm happy to send all these articles to people too, because I love all these pieces. But there's an article that I read about this university, this Mayan university in Guatemala. It's called Ixil University. I don't know if you all have read it, but it's this beautiful place where it's not accredited by the government. People just basically learn what their communities want them to learn, right? So they learn about climate justice, they learn their language, they learn all the things that are important, right? And in theory, I guess what the community college is supposed to be, right? Like things that help your community and for community by community. But, you know, all of that to say is, you know, my work really focuses on that, is like, how does that even exist at an institution, right? And especially, you know, like as an administrator, like how do I create space for that? I talk to my faculty a lot about like, what is education? What does it mean? Lots of philosophical conversations about, you know, like the fact that there in most indigenous language, there isn't a word for education. Education translates to like the journey and coming to know, like that's the thing that you're focused on, right? Like in my own community, right? When I learned things from my mom, from my grandmother, we learned them through dichos, through stories. Right? Like we always grew our own chamomile, our own hierba buena, right? Like things that those are the things that were important to me, right? And then, you know, being in an academic space, in college and all of that, even as an administrator, like it's hard to find space for that, right? It's hard to be like, this is my artistic self and this is who I am as an indigenous person and this is who I am as an administrator who's forced to think about budgets and all this gross stuff for survival of the institution, right? Yeah, and again, like just thinking about like the educational system, like as it really centers on individualism, right? The intellectual property and what does that mean, right? Versus, you know, and at the expense and versus our inner knowing, our deep wisdom, right? And again, what does that mean for our community? For my dissertation, I felt really fortunate. It was art-based. And so I asked community to create art pieces around the question of what is knowledge, what is education, what would education look like and feel like if it was different. I had 150 art pieces, and it was really beautiful to see what people produced. You know, there were pieces that centered around anger, and my favorite piece is this beautiful woodcut of an indigenous person with a colonizer head cut off with a knife. And it's so beautiful. And again, like she submitted a statement with it and talks about like, this is what I want people to know. Like, this is the anger that I have. This is also like, I want this to exist in an academic space, right? And so it was really beautiful, again, to be able to do that. I do that kind of work with my faculty. I'm a printmaker, so I teach printmaking workshops to the faculty, and that's how we think about these questions. I taught at the tribal college, the Makushu Tribal College, and we read this textbook called Decolonizing Social Work. And again, all of the people in my class, all of the master's students learned lino cut on the first week, and then every week when they read a chapter, they had to create a piece of art with what they read. And a lot of them pushed back, right? The first week they were like, I'm not an artist and I'm not creative. And we spent some time thinking about like, who told you that about yourself? Why do you think that about yourself? Why do you think that about your skills, about, again, your ways of knowing? And it was really beautiful. It was really beautiful to spend that time together. Some of them still send me some of the linos that they work on, especially the people who push back. And so it was really cool. It was really cool to see that and to create that kind of art healing space in the classroom.
Thank you so much. Next to Saray.
Que no se mi luitiwak, nanotoka Saray Argumedo. Hello, relatives. My name is Saray Argumedo. I hope the sun greeted you well today. It is an honor for me to be here. I grew up in the borderline of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, also known as Chuco. I have a fellow Chucano here that's pumping me up. First of all, I would like to thank the Doctora Baca for the invitation. It's such a intimidating space for me, actually, but it's been such a privilege to share space and conversation with the few folks that I've been able to meet. I also want to acknowledge the 7 or 8 original nations of this land. As a person that has migrated, that's one of the key things that my parents have taught me is to know where we're migrating, not only the land, acknowledging the land, but the people that have been taking care of the land. It's also been an honor to introduce myself to the Mississippi River. Pues cuando, cuando me imaginé, the only river that knows me is the Rio Grande, the Rio Bravo, So it's been very beautiful to greet the waters, as water has ancestral memory, and water is, it remembers and it comes back always, right? So with that, when thinking about knowledge systems, and as a first generation student born, the 7th child, I was the first one born on this side of the border, del otro lado del charco. And, I think that somehow I've been able to maneuver between these two worlds, right? Of community and academia. I can't find myself just being in that academic space because, like the saying says, you become where you're at. We start acting like these people, we start talking like them, we start walking like them. And to me, it's been very important to have that balance and be able to walk in these two worlds to connect somehow, whether I'm far away from my community and it's connecting to the land, right? And I think that that's the first foundation of knowledge systems, is knowing that each and every one of the universities that each and every one of you come from are standing on stolen land, right? And acknowledging the fact that the majority of the people within these spaces are not the original people of those lands, right? So I think that as somebody that's coming into these spaces and connecting with the land, connecting with the people, to me, that's the foundation of everything, and everything just falls beautifully into place. You know, our journey within the academia falls beautifully into place when we begin to, you know, make those relations. And I think that that's one of the things that I feel that is needed within the academia, is that transparency, right? It feels so far from reach. And I was just sharing earlier in one of the sessions that it's not transparent, you know, it's only a few folks. And now that we're in here, well, what do we do, right? How do we maintain? How do we remain grounded in who we are and where we come from and what we believe in too, right? Because we begin to adapt and knowing these, like this vocabulary, and it starts drifting us apart, you know, from that root, from that corazón, you know, that deep root that is within us. We don't walk into the academia by ourselves. We have our ancestors walking right behind us each and every time. So how do we honor that? You know, how do we honor those spaces? How do we honor them and the path that they paved for us? So honestly, I feel that being in the community has, I've done more work in community-based, more community-based education, knowledge systems, and you know, that indigeneity also of, you know, connecting through the land. And the work that, you know, I've had the privilege of doing is organizing women from across the Americas through hip hop. And as you saw earlier, there was a video that was shown, and it's women from all over the Americas: Canada, Puerto Rico, Colombia, Mexico, Ciudad Juárez, El Paso, Las Cruces, East LA. They're scattered all over, right? And they're indigenous women, Chicanas, Chicanx women, Latinx, and the idea is coming together as a, you know, as a group to be able to show and or give awareness to our missing and murdered relatives. You know, I feel that the borders not only has language separated us, but also borders, right? And there's been this disconnection between the original nations of the North and the South because of these borders. So what we've tried to do through music, as music is like a tool to unite people, that's how we've connected, right? There's a needs base in community. And we need to answer that, right? Whether it be through articles, whether it be through participatory methods, whether it be through opening space, the community is in need, and we need to respond to that. That's our responsibility. We've had the privilege of coming into these universities and studying, you know, now it's our responsibility to give back. Why is it that, and earlier too, we were talking about this, why is it that every thesis, every dissertation stays within these archives in the university when it's data that's been collected and stories that have been collected from community? Where is our responsibility to go outside and share, hey, you know what, this is what I found. Like, what do you think about this? This is what I'm going to present at the university. I think that that's where the disconnection happens, right? And that's where that knowledge to me is sacred, you know, communities and how folks migrate and move and adapt, and how original communities have stayed and remained and protected their lands. That's knowledge. You know, there's a survival there in these spaces that we have not tapped into within that, you know, within the academia. And that's how I feel that, you know, when I start feeling too in the academia, oh, go to another meeting and another meeting, I'm like, I need to step out. You know, I need to take out my shoes and reconnect to the land, because that's important. Because then we start drifting away from that, you know, we start drifting away from who we are and where we come from.
Yeah, thank you so much for such a rich answer. Thank you, all the panelists. And actually, some of you touched on this a little bit, and that is, so my next question is to please explain how interrogating ways of knowing in production can be forms of healing, which again is getting to the theme of our panel and conference. We may actually just go in reverse order, because I think it flows very nicely from Saray's response. So we'll go in reverse order that we just had.
your bike back.
Oh, yeah? Healing. We were just talking about this in La Doctora Vanessa's session, right? She's back there. Creating that space of healing. You know, I think that we can each find our own way, right? According to what we were taught or what we grew up with. But, you know, I honestly feel that it's that connection to the people around you, you know, that connectedness, that, you know, it's important to have this solitude, but it's also important to interact with your fellow humans, you know, and interact with the land, connecting with the land. I think to me, that's one of the most important things wherever you might go, you know, like, for example, this conference, I was thinking about each and every one of you when I showed up, because I looked at the schedule and it was from 8 to 6, right? And I'm like, dang, when do they have a time to connect with the community? When do they have time to go to the schools and see what the teachers are doing in these spaces? You know what I mean? You all can't, because you have to wake up at 8 and then you leave at 6, and then it started raining and it's like, dang, I guess I'm just gonna stay here, you know? And I think that if we're gonna create spaces of healing, there has to be that leeway, you know, knowing that we're people, we all come from different walks of life. And we all have our own problems, and you all are probably, some of you are sitting here thinking of all the stuff that you need to do when you leave here, you know, or all the stuff you've been working on throughout this time that you haven't had the opportunity to really be present here right next to the Mississippi River, you know, like, to know that. I think that that's also a responsibility as the folks move up the ladder, you know, within the academia. It's also that responsibility to remember, oh, dang, I was there at some point. We need to support each other. We need to open up this space to be able to have time to you know, to talk to people. For example, we ended up meeting this teacher, this local teacher that was talking to us. She was a white woman. And she was sharing how, you know, there's folks that have migrated. So for the first time in the, I don't know, 18 years that she's been working here, she's now they're establishing English as a second language. And that was a shock to me. I'm like, what now? Like, it's 2024. She's like, yeah, you know, and luckily she was retiring, you know, she's like, I'm out, I'm not gonna do this, right? And it was interesting to me, like, wow, you know, we're here in these spaces learning from each other. And a lot of it is repetitive because we all come from the same walks of life for the most part, right? But what about the folks that are doing the work here in this city? When have we connected, you know, to the places where we go have these conferences? When have we connected to the people outside and said, hey, well, we have tools. We're coming from the Southwest. How can we help you all? Where's that hermandad, you know? And I think that healing that way, it's important, that exchange, kind of like our ancestors did, right? We would trade. Hey, you know, I'll trade you this. And that's an exchange, right? We might not have physical tools, but an exchange of knowledge, an exchange of methods, you know? What are they doing here? How are they treating our people here? That they migrated this far. I mean, dang, you know, like, it takes a strong person, strong family to migrate this far. And now they're here. How are they taking care of them, you know? And that's our responsibility. The Southwest has the privilege of being on the border of Mexico, you know, or connecting with folks that are relatives from the South that are migrating. We have tools, we have spaces. Instead of fighting against each other for grants, why not spread the love over here? You know, how are they doing? Connecting with them. What tools can we use that they're using here for our people back home or for their people that have migrated, you know? I think I'm thinking of healing in that sense.
Yeah, I think when I think about healing, obviously I am learning more and more how to integrate who I am as an artist, like I said, at work and in my work at work. But as I've been thinking about academia, right, and like thinking about the work that I do at the college and in the community even, right, it's like, it doesn't have to be the way that we experienced it, right? And I think sometimes that's hard for people to hear. And I know, I mean, most of you probably believe that too, right? But it's really interesting because I talk to my faculty a lot about this culture of love and care. Like, how amazing would it be if our students felt that we love them just for who they are, right? Not when they're a good student, not when they're turning in their assignments or following directions, like if they just felt like we love them, right? And not just faculty in the classroom, but right, like financial aid, like if they felt like the people at the financial aid counter felt like they love them. I laugh because we're so far from that at the college I work at. But and even just like administrators, right? Like you as a faculty member, you as someone who works at a college, like if you felt that your administrator loved and cared for you, right? That it wasn't like us versus them thing, right? That it, you know, like when I have faculty who are sick, I don't care if they submit sick time or not. Like whatever, like I know that they work more than 6 hours or whatever, whatever this the sick time equivalent is. I don't even know, right? But I heard people laughing because I know it's hard, right? It's really hard. And so I think a lot about like, how do we get to that place, right? Sometimes I'm like, this is never going to happen. This kind of liberation is not going to happen at the institution. I have people who I work with in community who are like, you're wasting your time, girl. Like there's nothing for you there. And sometimes I feel that way. And then sometimes I don't, right? Like sometimes I do feel loved and cared for by my faculty. I know that they feel loved and cared for me. I know that their students feel loved and cared for by them. But yeah, I think one of the ways that we do that healing work is the emotion stuff in the classroom, right? Like I think a lot about the kind of education I got. And it wasn't until, you know, my entire doctorate, I felt the most regulated I've ever felt in my life. Like I never felt as regulated in my doctoral program, which is wild, right? I did a program through the Makoshi Tribal College. My faculty started every class either with some kind of grounding. I had a beautiful professor, Dr. Cornell Pee Wee who's Comanche, and he started every class by playing his flute. Sometimes he would cry while he was playing his flute. And again, it was so beautiful. Like I was sobbing with him, like, and again, like I again, one of those people that had to dissociate up and like to be successful, quote unquote, right? And so this emotions thing is new to me, thanks to therapy and connection with community and all this stuff. But I didn't know that was possible, right? To go through an entire doctorate program and be regulated and not be flight or freeze mode, right? And like I think that would be beautiful, right? If our students and our communities could experience that at the institution. But you know, some of the questions, I wrote these down because this is how I start every kind of PD, every kind of meeting with faculty. We're always talking about, again, like what's the purpose of what you're doing in your classroom? Who taught you that? What kind of relationship do you want to have with your students? What do you want your students to leave your classroom with, right? Like I think for the most part, I think everyone thinks about like, oh, I want my students to come out from college this way, right? Be these whatever, these images of who we think people should come out of college with. And it's never, I don't know, like it's never really content, right? Like I think sometimes people really focus on like content, and sure, it's important, right? But also maybe not. Like I think like the things that I learned that were really important, that my community people have learned that really important, is about how they felt about themselves, right? And about who they were in their communities. Yeah, I'm trying to see if I missed anything else. Yeah, and then also just again thinking about what you were talking about the land, right? Like I've had so many conversations with my faculty, specifically STEM faculty, who don't think the land in place has anything to do in their classroom. And again, like thinking about like, why is that important? Why is it important that you're teaching engineering in Seattle and not in Mexico? Or like why, like what is indigenous sovereignty? What does that have to do with what you're doing in the classroom? Why is it alarming that we have no ties to any of the tribes that, you know, are near us or in whose land we're on, right? And so We have all these conversations. I think sometimes, again, I feel like, yes, we're moving forward. And sometimes I'm like, wasting my time. I'm gonna go be an artist full time.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think this is a complicated question, to be honest. It's a very complicated question because how do we heal in the afterlife of slavery? How do we heal in the dispossession of indigenous land? How do we continue to breathe environmental racism, right? How do I, in my classroom, have to convince Latinx students that their histories are bounded to the afterlife of slavery in the Americas, right? That it's not deeply an African-American responsibility or connection, right? When we think about the African diaspora in the Americas, we have to think about the land. We have to think about Black people as indigenous to the Americas, 1492, right? We have to think about what survived in the Middle Passage. So I spend a lot of time thinking with my students around what are the things that we retained ancestrally from the Middle Passage? What are some of the practices, right? Whether it be Santeria, whether it be Candomblé, whether it be Vodou, right? What is it that we are still holding on to ancestral knowledge? I mean, for me, I tap into a lot of ancestral knowledge as a form of healing because that's the only way we are going to be able to survive the afterlife of slavery and indigenous dispossession, right? To be able to connect with ancestors in a way that allows for our present moment to be marooned, right? For our present moment to not simply become institutionalized, to not simply be folded in to the neoliberal project of a liberal arts curriculum, right? I spent a lot of my career in small liberal art colleges where Taco Tuesday is Taco Tuesday, right? Where Latinidad becomes a commodity, right? Where we are simply a folklore, a merengue, a bachata, a cumbia, and then that's it, right? And our histories are much more complicated than that, right? We have interior wounds that are generational, right? How do we heal from that, right? And this question also made me think a lot about Western religion and Western spirituality, because a lot of the communities that I engage with are actually very evangelicos, Pentecostals, right? We have to think about how Christianity really continues to have a particular kind of philosophical and ideological hold on Latinidad, right? So part of that is also, that's another decolonial moment, right? Like how do we really kind of question and heal from Western religions that have also oppressed us, right? Profe Lopez?
Gracias. I love this question because it makes me think about what could be in our K-12 schools and how interrogating ways of knowledge and knowledge production can cultivate community, healing, and joy in resistance. In her book, Black Feminist Thought, Patricia Hill Collins states, and I quote, "Any critical theory that energizes African-American women to struggle in the context of everyday life will be more valuable than social theories that, no matter how logical, correct, or eloquently proclaimed, foster hopelessness. It requires providing an array of pragmatic actions that can work in everyday life." And she echoes this sentiment in her latest book, Lethal Intersections, that talks about resistance to intersectional violence, right? In a given context, place, and space globally, right? So these insights speak to a project that I've been working on over the last several years that involves a research practice partnership where those of us who have the quote unquote privilege of working in the academy and practitioners, teachers, and others who are working in community to create, high school ethnic studies courses and beyond, can work together to create new knowledge on the implementation and the scaling up of this, the institutionalization of these places of healing. And so I think about how this maps onto all these intersectional inequalities that we see: race, gender, ethnicity, class, English language, learner status, disability, sexuality, and so on, and the transformative potential of institutionalizing this curriculum, this pedagogy, these spaces of healing and compassion and flexible solidarity we need to document and we need to scale it up. So for example, one of the teachers says, what do you say when when a student shares something openly? I can contextualize it, right? It's not your fault. I bring in the larger context of oppression and marginalization. One student said, Mr. Jimenez, you just described my whole life. I never understood how any of these things fit in. And it was like a release for her, a relief for her, end quote. Interviews with other students in different classes, whether it's Native American studies, Chicano studies, Africana studies, talk about the importance of these ethnic studies courses as spaces of healing and joy and hope for their communities. In my book, Hopeful Girls, Troubled Boys, Race and Gender Disparity in Urban Ed, I talk about Ms. Gutierrez, a high school teacher in a predominantly Dominican high school, where most of her students were like me, Black Latinos, and she was a non-Black Latina in New York City, took her class to the American Indian Museum, even though it was not covered in the official, quote unquote, official curriculum or the statewide exam, cultivating that sense of solidarity, of really recognizing the harms of the structural violence of settler colonialism, anti-Blackness, and linking all of these liberatory struggles that created really a space of convivencia, of joy. This is why that current attack on our K-12 and institutions of higher ed that talk about all of these structural violences and their intersections has the power to heal, right? We need to combat all of these efforts from school district to school district, but also in our places of work and higher ed and so on, precisely because they are spaces of empowerment and of healing.
Thank you very much. These are wonderful examples, very insightful. So thank you so much for sharing. And then some of you have touched on this last question already, but I would like to go ahead and ask it. And that would be to please give some examples or additional examples of how the intersection between the land, community, and education relate to interrogating ways of knowledge and production as forms of healing. And we'll go with the original order. So we'll go back to Dr. Nancy Lopez.
So again, in thinking about, my own life experience with this, growing up in the 1970s and 80s in New York City public housing, attending de facto segregated public high schools, it was these experiences with land, with knowledge, and the rich cultural wealth of my family that created my visceral commitment to what Ruth Zambrana calls creating equity lifts for those who, like me, were coming from backgrounds that were normally not present in these spaces. So when I think about how each of us has a responsibility to make that connection between tierra, comunidad, and education, and engage in creating what Alden Morris in his book, Scholar Denied on W.E.B. Du Bois talks about when he speaks about liberation capital, and I quote, a form of capital used by oppressed and resource-starved scholars for a subaltern school of thought that seeks to challenge the intellectual foundations of oppression, as well as the programmatic innovations to be used as weapons of liberation, end quote. All of these things inspire me and help me think about ways in which we can continue to make those connections between the land, the community, and education.
Thank you.
So just some thoughts, and I really want to be really brief so we can have a really robust Q&A. But I think a lot about the work of Lorgia Garcia Peña, right? Community as rebellion. We don't get into these spaces without community, right? Just a full circle moment. Professor Nancy Lopez was my master's thesis advisor while I was getting a master's degree in Latin American Studies at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. I'm here because of her. I'm here because there's been generations of Black and Latina women of color scholars that were able to open a path, right, for a third generation Brooklynite kid from Bushwick, Brooklyn, from public housing, right? Like that's incredibly, like I'm not here alone, right? And I want to echo the powerful words of, my colegas, right, around like, you don't enter to these spaces by yourself, right? Your ancestors who are not in this physical realm walk with you here, right? You're in this because people have community. Community is really part of how we can survive. How can we resist the multiple forms of oppression that we continue to live and coexist in? So I think a lot about community and the possibility of community being not simply our rebellion, but being our cimarronaje, right? What does it mean to be marooned with each other? What does it mean to not deeply depend on these institutions, right? With part of what happens sometimes in these institutions is that there's still a fight, right? I'm still fighting for Black studies. I'm still fighting for Black Latinx people to be part of Black studies, right? I'm still fighting within Latinx studies to remember, hey, not every Latinx person in this country is a mestizo, right? And not every Latinx person, right? We have to talk about the whiteness of Hispanidad, right? We have to talk about white Latinx people, right? Because first of all, they're also not the majority, right? But also they get the full frontal limelight of what Latinidad is, right? So part of that community is really troubling the borders of Latinidad, right? Really troubling these borders, because part of the systematic violence that we continue to experience is because borders are incredibly violent, right? There are borders that have been made around Hispanic. There are borders that have been made around Latinidad, right? And we have to reckon with that, right? We have to reckon with the fact that these are particular borders that are violent for Black and Indigenous peoples, right? That indigeneity shouldn't be an add-on to being Hispanic, right? That Blackness is not simply an add-on to Latinidad, right? But that it's actually foundational to what we understand to be Latinx. Yeah. It's huge.
I love that book, by the way. My therapist just recommended it. If you have not read Community as Rebellion, it's beautiful. I sobbed through it. She talks a lot about community as a verb, rebellion as our birthright. It's so beautiful. So I'm glad that you mentioned it. Yeah, I wanted to share with you all a quote that I think about a lot. And it really resonated with me with this question, because I think a lot about, especially for those of us who have been made to feel like we don't have homelands anymore, right? Like there's a severance to our homelands. My family, I live in Seattle now. I was the first to be born in LA. Before that, my family was in El DF for work. And before that is when they were in Angamacotiro, Michoacan, right? Which is where I'm from. And so many times removed from my homelands, right? And so I, am relearning my family's language. My mom knew it a little bit. My grandmother was fluent, right? And so thinking about that severance, or that illusion to severance, right? And like our body remembering those lands, and our body remembers our language. But I wanted to read this quote. It's by Silvia Patricia Solis in an article called Letter to My Children from a Place Called Land. So land is the flesh of our mothers and grandmothers, their embodiments, the constant and closest place to Indigenous lands I know, and the only lands I can give you, right? And so I think about that a lot, about how our bodies, our mothers' bodies, our grandmothers' bodies are woven with knowledge. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of us, like that's what we know, right? Like that's what we know to be true, because some of us are so separated from where our family is from, right? Where their DNA is in the land, right? And so I think about that a lot. And yeah, and again, like thinking about that and what it means for my work, like especially again, being Indigenous, but not being Indigenous to the Pacific Northwest. What is my role to support, and again, Indigenous sovereignty, the stewards of the land, people who are still there. Yeah, I think about this almost every day, especially, because tribal relations in the Pacific Northwest are very complicated. And, federal recognition, what does that mean? What's my place in that? Right. And what does that mean for me as an administrator, for me as someone who has a lot of power in the institution, right? And policies and rules and policing those rules and the borders of knowledge making, right? That she talks about in that Community as Rebellion book as well. Lots of thoughts, but for sure I am excited for your all's questions, so I will stop there.
Thank you. I appreciate you all, what you shared. And to go on with that, I think when thinking of these three, right? Land, community, and education, I need to reflect on myself, right? It's before any title, before any degree, it's always this constant reminder that first, I'm a daughter, right? I'm a tia, I'm a sobrina, you know, I'm an hermana. And all of that connects with my responsibility, you know, for walking this path, you know, and walking this living life today. All of that, then, you know, centering around all of that, everything else, you know, that's around me, it just falls right into place, how I had shared earlier. And looking at community, you know, and sitting with community, I think that that's where this emergence comes from too, being able to ask what is happening rather than assume from, you know, from just seeing the statistics or reading, you know, what is happening in the news, no, asking, what is it, you know, what is it that's happening within these pockets, within these spaces, right? And I feel that that responsibility too, that comes from, you know, that community-based education, that I come from these communities, my responsibility now is to be able to attend to what's happening in the community and staying connected that way, right? And I feel like the work outside of the academia that I do is basically on that, right? Is building that solidarity that you all were talking about. We've been separated by borders, you know, and there's missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada, in the US, but we also have Ni Una Más in Mexico, Centroamérica, Sudamérica. Why are we not talking to each other? You know what I mean? Why are we not supporting each other across the Americas or globally? You know, there's all of these things that are happening globally. They affect us. The folks that have migrated to the Americas also that are bringing, you know, that ancestral knowledge here and that pain that's happening in the Middle East, we feel it. If you walk on this land, you feel what's happening, you know? And I think that that's where these intersections are, they're almost like blurred lines. They're all in one pot. They don't have to be separated. They're all there. It's just, it starts within us, you know, and where we stand and how we stand and how we show up, you know. I think that that's one of the most important things is how we show up to places, you know, how we greet, how we look at each other. We're so consumed with, you know, being on our phones and checking emails and this and that. And there's no eye contact anymore. There's no connection anymore. COVID, oh no, hazte pa allá, you know, like no traes máscara. It's stuff like that that have disconnected us already, but we're all land, we're all community, we're all education, you know, and I feel that that just emerges with anyone's presence. When you carry that, nobody has to tell you what titles you have, what, you know, oh yeah, I have this and that, and I'm this. No, you see it. You see this person walking, you're like, damn, you know? That's the whole point, is that we carry land, we carry community, we carry education, and that's our responsibility wherever we might go.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Really appreciated all of your insights on this. So we do have ample time for some questions or comments. I'm going to come around with a microphone so that our folks online can hear your question. And as you ask your question, if you could please mention who you are and where you're, what institution you are at, and also what, you know, just very brief background about yourselves. Who'd like to go first?
Yeah.
Yes.
That would be.
Oh, I thought you had raised your hand. Okay, okay. Thought we had our volunteer, not yet. Okay, but we have a question right here.
More so a comment.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stacy Spella. I represent Howard University in Washington, D.C. and HBCU. I'm a third-year PhD student and one of the graduate fellows this year for AAHHE. And I just want to say, my God, I am so deeply moved, so deeply touched. One of the things that I psychologically kind of suffered from was being comfortable in Latinx spaces because my comfortability was in Black spaces. And I think that comes from my upbringing, being from the Bronx, New York. Shout out to Bushwick, Brooklyn. I had to take the 2 train all the way to get to you, but right? And what Black and brown communities look like, right? Then going to my historically Black college university as an undergrad and then being profoundly changed, right? Because Boricuanes didn't really look like that in Florida, right? And then what Latinidad looked like over there. And then being in a predominantly Black space where we didn't really see a Spanish person like you before, right? And so tying into what that looks like in that space. And I think that truly is the vessel, the calling. How do I bridge these communities together? Specifically in these, you talk about land, like the HBCU, what they said, every single historically Black college university sat in like a dump of where they're located, right? That is intentional, right? The land that we walk on in these spaces, like, when I'm like, I need to make a trip to the Mississippi River before I get to the airport today, right? Because that is so powerful. You are absolutely right. We do get lost, I say lost in the sauce of that white supremacist movement, right? And not the good sauce, right? La salsa mala. And sin sazon, right? That's for real. And so, so every single thing that all of you guys brought up, it's like God has me in this place at this time for a reason, right? And I felt that in my spirit as y'all were talking. And so thank you. I just have to say thank you for being who you are, showing up how you show up, and being in this space at this time. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Do we have any comments from the panelists? Dang. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Natalie Munoz, assistant professor at Rutgers University. I actually went to Howard with Stacy. So right now I am teaching social work. And I guess my question is, if you have any recommendations in terms of like how to not only decolonize our curriculums, but also I feel like the challenge that I'm having is like the racial climate in this country right now, the way that we are like regressing policy-wise in terms of like, you guys are talking about amazing things, right? Like your identity development, like healing from the land. And I feel like how important history is, right? Which is very connected to the research I did. And then at the same time, my Black and Latino students that are in my classes are like completely defeated by it. And I understand because they're on social media all the time and they're taking in all this negativity. And so I guess my challenge is, how do I continue to keep them or to give them like hope? I don't know, like because they look so defeated. And then some of the curriculum is just like a very deficit model in terms of like, these are all the problems Black and brown people have. And then I'm teaching Black and brown students, right? So sometimes I just feel like very limited because there's texts that are required that we are using that are like censoring white voices. And I'm trying to manage like, okay, well, how can I bring in other voices, but also like engage them in different ways outside of these like very constricted perspectives of learning to keep them somewhat hopeful so that they can go into the career knowing that they can create change. So any suggestions? I know that's like a deep question.
Thank you.
So I can start. So, you know, what was really interesting is, like I said, I taught at the Muckleshoot Tribal College. It was a Master's of Education program, and the class was titled, I don't remember, some like really problematic title about helping students with behavioral and mental issues or something like that. So we spent the first day talking about what that means for the class to be called that. Who gets to decide that? We talked a lot about the DSM and a lot about like how the DSM doesn't have room for, you know, like someone who has a diagnosis in the DSM maybe just isn't actually flaky. Like they just they just like aren't all over the place. Like they just are really committed to their family, and like, you know, it doesn't have room for all of that. And that book, the Decolonizing Social Work, was really beautiful for that because it talks a lot about the trauma, but also about the healing for that trauma, right? So it talks a lot about, you know, like how place holds trauma. And they have a beautiful story about that. And then they talk about like, how do we heal the land? How do we heal? And so I think it's like, in my classroom, a lot of people cried a lot, you know. It was interesting too, because I had, you know, everyone in my class was Indigenous. And so I had men who were like, I had never cried in front of anyone before. And as a faculty, like you have to probably be comfortable with that, right? Like I was crying there with them too. And I was like, you know, we read Bell Hooks, the masculinity thing. And we talked about how it's problematic and also beautiful, right? Like, so like making room for both things, but like making room for the emotions, I think is what's really important. Because I think what's hard, right, in education is that we're like, we know that it's awful and also cut that part out because you need to focus and be successful, right? Instead of like, this stuff is happening to our communities. We know that it's happening. How do we move that work forward? But it's hard, right? And I think it's okay to say, this sucks, you know.
I know that Nancy has her hand raised.
I apologize about my internet connection. Weather related is pretty poor, but
Oh.
Sorry again. One of the things I was going to recommend is somehow reaching out to districts in K-12 and that are facing constant attacks and creating a research practice partnership. Because one of the things that we can do in many of these states that are making it impossible to do this kind of work is allowing research. So in the ways that we can support our teachers, whether they're teaching social studies or music, and in ways that support the kind of liberatory curriculum that we know is creating a space of healing, is, I think, an ethical responsibility for us to support, because there are many creative ways to try to advance this work, even in hostile settings.
Right, thank you. We have another question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Luz Burgos Lopez. She, her, hers, ella. I'm a grad student, University of Connecticut Stores, and I am incoming chair of the Graduate Fellows Program. I was like, what am I doing? My question is more of, because the work that you all do is super important, but a lot of our community isn't invested in it, if we're being honest, right? What questions or things do you wish us who are not, as a white Puerto Rican, and both my parents are Puerto Rican, I'm just acknowledging my proximity to whiteness. What does it mean for me? What work should I be doing, or what work have you not seen that we're not doing, right? Because we think we're critical when we're criticizing Eurocentric whiteness, but not ourselves. And so I'm just wondering, what is your vision of what a Latinidad would look like that is foundational, right? Because we already know it's foundational in Blackness and indigeneity. What do we need to hear that you felt like maybe you haven't gotten it, you feel like you haven't had the space to say it, or it didn't feel like it was the right time? Because I feel like folks, they think they're doing critical work, but we not.
Sorry, thank you. I can answer that as best as I can. I feel like maybe that's where, I don't know, I feel like my community work stays in community. I academia is just like a place that I go and I'm like, all right, what do I need to do? And then I sprinkle some of that, you know, in it, and then that's it, right? But I feel that, you know, for example, the community work that I'm doing and have been invested in, you don't, it's autonomous, you know what I mean? There's no funds, there's no time. This is my path. Like, this is gonna be me forever. And I need to have a side job to be able to maintain that, right? And continue to support community. I think, and I feel that that's where my disconnection with academia has happened because, yeah, it's a space that is fully invested in articles, scholarly work, you know, and man, we get lost in it, you know, from one thing to another, to another, to another. And there's no stopping that we lose track of the outside world, like community and what's going on, you know. For example, like with the community work in the video that you all saw earlier, you know, it's not just hip hop, it's not just visuals, they each have a meaning. And some of this work, we also use it to circulate photos of missing relatives that, I mean, we have folks missing since 20 years ago, you know what I mean? And unfortunately, because of the violence and because of the injustices that we see every single day in every community when it comes to brown and Black and Indigenous folks, you know, it's constant, that it gets to the point where you forget that face that was missing 20 years ago starts fading, because there's other missing folks, you know? And the idea of it is, how do we creatively circulate and be in solidarity with the families of you know, these relatives? And I think that there's different ways to creatively create that space. But I think that I struggle with the theory. I'm praxis all the way, praxis as my comfort zone. And it's connecting the theory where I feel that, you know, sometimes I disconnect from academia, you know, and that's where I'll let the doctoras answer that. But, you know, I feel that in community, once you're invested in that, there's no escaping that. You can't turn your back anymore, you know? It's like you're taking the blindfold off and you're gonna see the reality, and that's it. You can't put it back. I mean, who puts it back? You can't. Even if you try, you could put it back, but you're still gonna see through it, because the reality is that's where the need space are, right? And if we're creating these spaces within the academia of, you know, scholarly talk and, you know, publishing, well, okay, how do we bridge it, you know, since we're coming from community? So then how do we start bridging that? You know, if it's through art, you know, if it's through poetry, if it's through whatever, you know, there has to be something. But I think it's cada quien, you know, like you must have a gift where you can merge these two worlds, you know, kind of like the rivers. You know, there has to be a way where you creatively create that space between these two worlds that you're walking in, and find your own way. Each and every one of you is going to have their own path towards that, you know, and how you maneuver through that, through those spaces. But
yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a great question. I appreciate the question. I'm really tired, right, of having to always be an intervention, right? I'm really tired always having to be a hyphen, an add-on to this larger project. I always get really surprised when I get invited to Latinx spaces. You started our conversation around the job market. I have never landed a Latinx studies job. And I publish in Latinx studies, I publish in Black studies. Part of that is we have to let go of Hispanidad. We have to let go of Spanish colonialism, the romance of it, right? The conquistadores were not heroes, right? We still idolize conquistadores, right? Part of that is we're never going to be able to move on if we're still beholden to Spanish colonialism, right? And that particular project around the Costa paintings and mestizaje, that's still part of our very much existence, right? I just came back from DF a few weeks ago. I'm in the airport. No one knows me in DF. Why are people assuming that ¿Quieres jalón para Guerrero? Right? Are you going to Guerrero? It's like, I'm actually not going to Guerrero, but I would love to go to Guerrero at some point. But it's this, you have to think about, like, we're still being called negritos, negritas, morenitos, you know, like the Casa paintings might have disappeared visibly, but they're embedded in our social fabric, right? You know, the New York Times Puerto Rican journalist, Mireya Navarro, right, wrote back in 2013 this really kind of spectacular headline where she said, for most Latinos, right, racial identity is more about culture than a color. Well, I don't know another community that is incredibly obsessed with colorism. Latinx folks are incredibly obsessed with colorism, right? We have literally, our apodos are literally based on our hue, right? Literally. So I think part of it is like, I'm really tired of being an add-on, right? And if we're gonna really reckon with the whiteness of Hispanidad or the mestizaje of it, right? We have to really blow that up. We gotta let it go, right? Why are we still holding on to Hispanic, right? And I think the work that a lot of us, you know, I'm thinking of the work of Zaida Dinte Flores, right? Obviously, Professor Nancy Lopez, really kind of this questioning around race and ethnicity. Well, Latinidad is not a race. It's not a racial category. We are marked, we are branded by our conquistadores, right? I don't want to be reminded of our Spanish colonialism on a daily basis, right? And we're still beholden to it, right? And when we imagine our communities to be a melting pot, we're still doing mestizaje 2.0, right? That is not undoing anything, right? To think about the racial diversity of Latinidad, well, yeah, there's a racial diversity that is incredibly conflictual, right? That is incredibly decentering of Blackness and Indigenous folks, right? So, yeah.
I think just one small thing I wanted to add is thinking about this question. I asked this question to myself a lot, is what does justice demand of me and what is it going to demand of us, right? Like when you think about all the Indigenous children being found under these residential boarding schools, or, you know, Black kids getting killed, like justice, this is why I hate the term social justice, right? Like, what is that? What does justice for them look like? It's not going to be published in a paper that analyzes the stuff, right? Or it's not going to be given to us by anyone, right? And I think is really thinking about that is, what is my role in justice, and what does that mean for how I navigate the world? It's a big question, but.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Patricia Redondo, past chair of the AAHHE board, and I just want to just say this is so incredibly knowledge building for me. Okay, on a personal level, you know, I, as an academic and in areas of whatever I do as a psychologist, but all of this is always learning for me. But the eloquence with which you all spoke is just so immensely impressive to me. And it's just like how, I guess, our young scholars evolve. It's just like how the world has changed when I think about Latinx studies, African American studies, ethnic studies, women's studies, and how you articulate the intersection of this so beautifully, but going deeper than that. So all of that is just, you know, I'm really kind of moved by it. The second thing I want to say is at the 2020 AAHHE conference pre-pandemic, some of you were there, and there was a lot of energy brought by our graduate students, and I think you were there, saying we needed to really focus on what you're talking about today, sort of the intersection of our multiple identities, and bringing more of the Afro-Latino perspectives into AAHHE. I just say, we're moving in that direction where, should be a continuing focus within AAHHE because it's only going to enrich all of us. And again, I'm personally very appreciative to each and one of you for all you're doing to make the changes that we need to hear about and to continue to learn. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Right, thank you. We have Nancy has her hand up.
And sorry, I had to switch to phone again, weather-related Wi-Fi issues. But one of the things I was going to ask AAHHE is, have they considered sending a letter to the Office of Management and Budget, Federal Registry, and even the census on why conflating race as a visual social status and ethnicity as cultural heritage is antithetical to equity-minded work and social justice and, distribution of resources to those at the margins of Latinidad? And if not, would AAHHE consider it? One of the things that I did with my husband, who is a Chicano curator and artist, in 2019 was co-curate a show with 20 indigenous, African-American, Afro-Latino, Latinx, Chicanx artists on what's your street race. And it was an outdoor installation specifically in a working class neighborhood that had no paywall for creating conversations about what's your street race and how lived experiences and relationships of power shape our reality of identity. And one of the things that I've noted is that in some cases, organizations have panels, but when it comes to like policy positions, that is not forthcoming as frequently as it should. So I'm just hoping that that could be something that could be considered.
Right. Thank you for that suggestion, Nancy. We have members of the AAHHE board, and so we'll certainly, I would assume we're going to put it on one of our agenda items. So thank you for raising that point. We are basically out of time. So I actually want to echo Patricia's words about the panel and just how eloquent and important your insights and willingness to share. As one of our student questions or pointed out, it is actually very moving to many of us. And we just think about all the factors that brought us together today, that we're all here together in the same room, listening to what you have to share. So this is a very moving experience for many of us. I also really appreciate Saray's suggestion about connecting these conferences to the land. We're moving it around to different locations. AAHHE did make a concerted effort and made a change in terms of hosting these conferences on the side of an institution of higher education, which I think is a great first step, but I love the idea of going further. Those of you who want to see the Mississippi River, you'd be surprised how close it is. It's maybe about a 10-minute drive from here. If you wanted to see the St. Louis Arch Museum, it's actually right along the Mississippi. Apparently, a few years ago, the whole museum was completely overhauled. I didn't see the previous one, but I have seen the more recent one. And I in my view, it is very tasteful in terms of acknowledging the work that was done and what the arch had symbolized, and a lot of the recognition of issues that brought forward, including there is an acknowledgement there that out of all the treaties that the U.S. government had with Native nations, all of them have been broken. And so that's somewhat of the tone in terms of putting the facts out there. And if you are interested in more of the indigenous influence on the land, I didn't realize until a few years ago that St. Louis, one of its nicknames is Mound City, because of the mounds that the indigenous peoples of the area had built. Unfortunately, many of them were raised in the building of the region. But if you go right across the Mississippi River, so it's maybe about a 12 to 13-minute drive from here, that's where Cahokia is located. And I didn't realize it's like right outside of St. Louis. So if you have time, I would encourage people to see that as well. So please let me ask you to, I don't have to even ask you, I'm sure a lot of you very much want to give a warm round of applause to acknowledge the fantastic work of this panel. Thank you so much. And Nancy, I don't know if you could see that, but there was a standing ovation. We have just a couple more minutes. We have some closing items here, and then we'll make sure to give people an opportunity to stand to meet the panelists. We do have a couple of items that we'd like to cover. One is we have Dr. Nancy Lopez's book that we had a raffle on. We have 3 copies, and we have, where are the names? So Nancy had referred to her book, Hopeful Girls and Troubled Boys. We did a raffle, and so if Dominga Sanchez is here, one of these copies is yours. Okay. Sylvia Martinez. Michael Weiss is the 3rd raffled copy. And then before we close, we do have a closing part of this ceremony, closing our conference. Before I ask our chair-elect to come to the podium, I actually want to turn the floor over to Dr. Patrick Valdez, who is our past chair.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you for moderating that panel. Muchísimas gracias to all the panelists for all of your words, echoing what everybody's already said, the tremendous amount of knowledge and sincerity that you brought with it. Just for some context, typically we, the board positions, the board member time period is typically from July 1st through the end of June 30th. But because this is the only time we meet as a community, publicly as a community, and bring everybody together, we do a customary handling or passing of the gavel off to the who's going to be the new chair. And I want to do that. Before I do that, I want to mention many of you who've been here since the beginning know that Asara Santiago, Dr. Asara Santiago, is our current chair. Unfortunately, she was not feeling well and had to leave. She's okay. She's back home, but was not doing well. And so I want to I did get some remarks from her that I want to read about the chair-elect. But before that, I want to just take a moment to publicly acknowledge Dr. Asara Santiago and the leadership that she's given AAHHE this past year. She's been an incredible colleague and mentor, and her passion and her commitment not only to AAHHE, but to Latinidad and to our Latinx communities, not over this past year, but for an entire career. I want to just publicly acknowledge that, and let's give her a warm round of applause, and let's send her some healing energy out there so that she can do well. And these are her words. Now that I will read as I pass the gavel. I believe we have a customary gavel here that has Dr. Cristobal Rodriguez's name on it. And these are her words. It has been such a pleasure working with you. As you know, we had to make some critical decisions this past year, and you consistently approached those difficult times with optimism and positive action. I've always believed that I could count on you because of your integrity and trustworthiness. We have been a great team, and I look forward to continuing the good work ahead as past chair. On behalf of the AAHHE membership and the AAHHE board, it's my great honor to hand Dr. Cristobal Rodriguez the gavel.
Oh, muchísimas gracias. Es una gran bendición. Really is a blessing to be in this position, to have this opportunity, and to take this with great responsibility. A lot of the work that we do, I see it as great responsibility. Often we think about our sense of academic freedom. I think it's an academic responsibility when we consider our voice, our positionality, our histories, our familias, nuestras comunidades. And really is a blessing to have this opportunity to be in community with all of you, to be in community with the ideas and concepts that we are advancing and fighting for, and the struggle together in solidarity, and know that we're here to continue the good work and support the good work. So gracias. Look forward to the next steps. we do want to recognize a few folks. I actually want to give my colleague an opportunity to come up, Mora. I wanted to also kind of do this a little bit with her because she's on our board, but also Marie is also kind of our host for next year. So, and then we'll be tag teaming a lot with Antonio Duran, but before we wanted to give some recognitions for folks. But let's give Antonio Duran, he's the planning chair. But before we take a leap to what's looking forward, let's give some deep love and appreciation to a few folks. We want to first recognize the previous chair, Audrey Baca Lopez from Mount San Jacinto College. Is she with us? Audrey, let me start by saying we are indebted to you for your vision, your words, your commitment, your sacrifice, do it all. But please, thank you. We can't thank you enough. We know it's a huge commitment to do this work, and you have clearly enriched us in so many levels with your contributions as the planning chair of the conference. A few words from you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, my AAHHE familia. Thank you for joining us in the celebration of our different ways of knowing. This is my 7th year as part of the AAHHE community, and my 2nd year on the tenure track as an English profesora at Mount San Jacinto Community College on the ancestral lands of Luiseño and Kuya peoples. And this year, thank you again, I was honored to be the chair of the 2024 AAHHE Conference Planning Committee. And my AAHHE familia has been an integral part of my personal and professional journey, not only at these conferences, but with the relationships that I've built from the first time I attended as a doctoral student to becoming a graduate fellow, and then as an active member, and eventually as chair of the committee. I am indebted to the people who make up AAHHE for your mentoring, for your guidance, for your encouragement, and for the unconditional love and passion for change that exists here. I wanted to thank the members of the Conference Planning Committee for setting us on a track to be more inclusive and open in what we consider knowledge, and especially to the incoming chair, my co-chair, Dr. Antonio Duran. Thank you for your longtime support and friendship. And I also welcome the incoming co-chair, Dr. Lazaro Camacho, who has also worked tirelessly as a dedicated member of the Conference Planning Committee in the years past. I want to thank so many thanks to all the people who made this year's conference a reality. While I couldn't be there in person with you, I'm happy to share that it is for good reason. My husband and I are 4 months pregnant with our first child, and it's been a very long journey for us, much longer than even my doctoral program. This year's theme, Interrogating Ways of Knowing and Production as Forms of Healing, the intersections between La Tierra, Comunidad, and education, has helped me personally reflect on priorities and how I engage with the work I do, and even what kind of parent I want to be. For instance, while I wasn't leading a session this week, I introduced my first year English 101 students, right, to the self-described Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet, Audre Lorde. This week, we discussed the speech, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house," in which Lorde argues for women to celebrate their differences as a form of power and as a foundation for changing the racist patriarchal system. This speech, delivered in 1979, resonates still with our work today. And I too stand here, as Lorde states, outside of the circle of the society's definition of acceptable women, asking you to interrogate, to challenge, to interrupt, to disrupt, as we create new tools to dismantle the master's house. We, AAHHE, right, we invite you to take what you have learned here this week and to continue the work in your practice and in your personal lives. We ask you to leverage your privilege and your resources to push back against colonizing practices of knowledge production and burnout. We encourage you to create spaces through different ways of knowing for yourself and for others to heal from historical traumas. We urge you to practice joy. Again, right? We urge you to practice joy as part of your work. And as you leave here today, be sure to know that you take this AAHHE Familia with you, as I have, as we are stronger together. As Lord affirms, in our world, divide and conquer must become define and empower. And I wanted to thanks one more time. And don't forget to connect with Antonio if you hope to continue this work as part of the conference planning committee. Thank you.
Gracias. And just to reflect on your words, on your work, and the concepts that you just spoke about, and the concept of this session and the conversation. I sent an email to Doctora Lopez just a little while ago. I hope you got it. I agree with your recommendations. As a commissioner of President Biden's Educational Equity and Excellence and Economic Opportunity for Hispanic, I'm happy to advance that, more than happy. I feel responsibility to advance that recommendation, not just as the chair-elect of AAHHE, but that's my commitment to recognize concepts and ideas and conversations like these today do matter and are powerful. So thank you for your work, and I'm committed to advancing these concepts forward as much as I can. So thank you. A few more thank yous, and more importantly, we want to especially thank our gracious host. The commitment, the time, the sacrifice, there's no words to really probably to describe what you have been through in this whole past year and a half, maybe. I wouldn't say a year because it's been more than a year. There's no words or actions we can say to truly express how deeply appreciative and grateful we are for your leadership, your contributions. Let this be a small token of our love, our appreciation for your love and contributions to our community. Doctora Aurora Mora. Muchísimas gracias. We need you to say a few words. I know you always have wonderful things to say.
I've been admiring these at the front desk. Oh, since they arrived, I was like, oh, how lucky the person that receives these. They're so gorgeous. Well, thank you. I feel guilty taking any of the credit because our staff in the Office of the Provost have truly, I'm looking around for them. I think they're outside probably ready to guide everyone to the next steps. But it's really been the support of our provost and our chancellor to bring us here. It was a nudge, and I am so thrilled and honored. I feel like the words that have been shared here, the sentiments, I hope and will sit with me so that we can continue to change WashU and places like WashU because we need it. So I thank you all for bringing that here. I hope this is not the last time you visit us here at WashU. Know that aquí tienen su casa siempre. And come and help us be better. But thank you for these beautiful flowers. And thank you to the incredible team. I keep looking for them, but I hope you will join me as you see Cecilia, Nick, and Tamara, especially. I will thank them next week as well. But thanking them, they met with our team on a weekly basis for literally a year and a half. And thank you to our conference planning team through AMC as well. These are efforts that take a lot of coming together. Well worth it. So thank you for joining me here in my academic casa, but please help us continue to make these spaces better, to interrogate them. I have questions about how we need to interrogate the epistemologies of the 10-year process and ways in which you know, I need some strategies. So more convo to be had here. But thank you again. I am thrilled and honored to have been a small part of this process, and I am thrilled and honored to be excited to travel to Denver next year. So.
Gracias. We do want to recognize our partners with AMC. There are representatives here. Is Lucia on as well? No. We want to also thank Lucia for all her work and dedication. AMC, please rise and let's give them a hand. It's not been easy work, but this is a lot of effort as well. Coordinating last minute requests, efforts, changes. Can you do this? We feel that, it's not easy work. So thank you for that. We have one more back there also from AMC. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What's next? You should come up here and join us, Antonio. So we're going to be part of the working. We're going to see a lot of each other. I was like, Antonio, we're going to be tied at the hip, like for the next year or so, including Marie Mora. We're going to be tied at the hip because she's going to be our gracious host. Keep these dates in mind. We were talking about we should consider Saturday, which would be the 22nd. But nonetheless, Denver, March 19th to the 21st is what we have right now. But it'll be, if it's going to be the one shifted over, then it'll be the 20th through the 22nd, obviously. But keep this in mind. Part of our vision as a board is to be more inclusive, and that means be more regionally inclusive. And we see a relationship with being also more racially inclusive as well as we advance and grow and evolve our organization, right? And that means also thinking about being mindful of our histories, but at the same time being critical of our histories, but advancing and growing the organization to advance and grow the work that we're all passionate about. I'm excited about what's to come working with these wonderful, amazing, beautiful people here. Know that we are also at the same time listening, always looking for people to be part of the conversation with us along the way. We recognize there's a lot of people who are part of the organization at some level, part of the work, the passion, the sacrifice, and the advancement of our community. And we're excited about being at Metro State Denver. Anything you want to say about Metro State Denver?
Yeah, we're actually extremely excited. We were very proud and feel very privileged to be able to host the 2025 AAHHE conference. And so everybody's excited. And actually, one of the themes that we have here actually fits very well on our campus. Our campus is built on a displaced neighborhood, predominantly Latino neighborhood. And so there's a big recognition of that in our campus community. The displaced, I was going to say the descendants, the children and grandchildren of those who are displaced do have access to the institutions that sit on that land, but that's something that we'll be having an opportunity to carry that theme as well. But we're extremely excited. Everybody, even our members of our board of trustees, we're excited to learn that we're hosting our 2025 AAHHE conference. And I would also, one other person I'd like to thank would be the IT support for the conference. So thank you so much, because it was able to make panel discussions and other parts of our work over the last few days so much easier. So thank you.
Don't you want to give us a glimpse of a vision of what we'd be expecting for a conference?
Ooh, yeah. Well, I'll bring up my conference planning co-chair, Dr. Lázaro Camacho, who will be joining us on this wild ride. I again also want to just highlight the power of the AAHHE Familia. Fun fact, Audrey and I were both grad fellows back in the day. So to be able to work under her powerful and visionary leadership was an absolute blessing. And Aurora was the co-chair for the graduate fellowship program at that time. And so it really was a all full circle to be able to work with these amazing and talented mujeres. But yes, 2025, if you are feeling inspired, excited about what we can continue to make AAHHE, we would encourage you all to join us on this journey on the conference planning committee. I really cannot emphasize enough how much of this conference was a product of the visionary gifts and talents of our conference planning committee. And so if you would like to join us, please reach out to myself and Lázaro. We would love to have you. You get compensated through conference registration. So do you want to highlight that? And we meet over the summer to do some planning for the conference. So yes, and I would invite Dr. Camacho to talk a little bit about his excitement for the conference.
So excited. Just leaping out of my body, so excited. What's good, everybody? Happy afternoon. Thank you for being with us to the end of this amazing conference experience. Just really quickly, I want to reintroduce myself. I'm Lázaro Camacho Jr. My pronouns are he, him, él. I'm a second-generation Puerto Rican kid from the west end of Providence, Rhode Island, who hopes to support the journey towards positive narrative sense-making through an intersectional understanding of identities. First, thank you so much to Antonio for inviting me to this great opportunity. Thank you to Audrey for modeling great leadership and tireless efforts. This is my second year participating through AAHHE, and I'm excited for the expanded opportunity. I think the biggest thing that I would like to share with you all in terms of my excitement and what Antonio has shared already is that I'm really excited to maintain the established legacy of AAHHE, but to continue to push us towards that sense of tension, that sense of uncertainty, and to really push us as an organization, as a conference committee, to meet the needs and goals of a pan-ethnic understanding of Latinidad, particularly in the US and beyond. We're a transnational border, right? Latinidad comes and goes across our borders in a variety of ways and spaces. And so we have an obligation, like many of our panelists said earlier, to not only meet the needs of what we're hoping to model here, to help that be an expansion or expression of Latinidad globally. So I'm excited to do the good work. I'm excited for you all to push us and to be a part of that work. And if you're about that life for real, when we put out the call for folks to join us, please do so. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So I have to catch a plane to get to my daughter's quinceañera in El Paso. I cannot miss this flight that leaves in about an hour and a half. Travel safely, con mucho amor. We will see you throughout the year. Gracias y felicidades.